Iran's strategy to deter escalation from Trump is by striking the Gulf. The big question is that enough? And to know that, the question would be, how much does Trump actually care about the Gulf, including the UAE and Saudi? Because if he doesn't care that much, if it's not that important to him, then we're pretty screwed, because the Iranian strategy of escalating and striking the Gulf won't work, and Trump will do whatever he wants to do to achieve his objectives. But if it actually does, it is a red line for Trump, and he won't cross it. He won't go too far. If the airports in the UAE or energy infrastructure in Saudi and the UAE are struck, this would cause Trump to backtrack. Then I'm a lot more hopeful. So the big question is, how much Trump does he care about the Gulf?
Well, I think I said on your show before, I don't think he cares that much. If he did, he wouldn't have started it in the first place. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that he doesn't.
I've asked you that question. Yes, exactly the answer last time.
No, but we are in a new situation now, because it's also important to understand there are other things that have happened. The strikes against Jordan, in and of themselves,
we speak a lot, don't we?
Look, what happened in Jordan, I think, is very important in the sense that you had. It breaks the pattern, but in a different way. It's not as if strikes against Jordan in and of itself are unprecedented. The Iranians are struck there. What the Iranians are saying, and this is part of the reason why they also made that threat against Bulgaria. Any
I missed
base,
that one. Sorry, a threat against Bulgaria. I missed that.
Yes.
When?
This is a couple of days ago. Any base that is used by the United States to attack Iran and to kill Iranians, the Iranians will treat as a legitimate target. And the United States uses a lot of bases in Europe, used German bases extensively, to funnel a lot of material military assets to the region. And so the Iranians certainly appear to be capable of reaching Bulgaria. Whether they can strike them with precision is a question mark, at least in my mind. What they did in Jordan was with a tremendous amount of precision. But what was even more important there is that it was done with very fresh intelligence, meaning that this is not based on them having satellite images that were 5-10 days old, but this was something that had happened at that base very recently, and the Iranians apparently found out very quickly, and it immediately struck. This, I think, has caused some pause on the American side. The Iranians have also been very successful in taking out a large number of aerial aircraft that has not been reported yet. At least not fully. And I don't know what the operational impact of that is, but again, it shows they have an ability to quickly know where things are in a manner that does not appear to have been the case in the previous war. So whether that is because they have now better intel from the Russians or the Chinese, or what they themselves say, which may be a deception or trying to distract people or get them to look in the wrong direction, is to say that they had intelligence coming from people on the ground in Jordan. That may not be true. I don't know what is true, of course, but it appears that there is a strength and accuracy and timeliness of the intelligence they have now that is different from the last war. And all of this just adds to a picture in which the capacity to escalate in ways that the US may not have predicted seems to be, I don't know if it's greater than before, but things that they didn't do last time, they seem to be doing this time. So there's still some surprises coming here. Will that deter Trump? I do not see any signs that it necessarily will. It still seems like we're going in a direction for some sort of a major escalation. And I think there's also a tendency in some of the GCC circles in which they may not want this war, and they're very angry about getting hit. But they're also seeing what the situation is if there's a deal. Many of them believe that a deal could end up to their detriment if, for instance, the Iranians get some degree of control over the Strait, which is a future they don't want to be in. I think this has caused some of them to also think that it's better if the US just goes in really big and tries to finish the job. The problem with that, of course, is the very concept of finishing the job is based on assumptions that are simply not true. I've not come across a single person with any military analysis and expertise that believe that there is a quick military solution to all of this. And if there isn't, going in for some sort of a quick fix will be as disappointing and as disastrous as the last time the US tried to do this, was just 2-3 months ago.
What is Trump's objective in all this? Is it to try to force, I see it as he's trying to get a concession from Iran regarding the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran gives up the fee for the Strait of Hormuz, I think the war would be over. Is that?
No, has nothing to do with the fees. Fees are not the real issue. The fees are not really the issue. The fees are, the fees is a manifestation of who controls the strait. So if you can collect the fees, you're controlling it. Is it the fee that is the issue? The fee would be a problem for Trump if Trump was paying the fee. If others are paying the fee, he couldn't care less.
So I'll rephrase the question. Okay, so if Iran accepts 2 corridors, would the war be over? Would Trump be fine walking away?
Yeah, it probably would be. The Iranians will never accept 2 corridors. For them...
That was my next question, yeah.
Yeah, for them, the more the US is willing to risk war over the strait, the more they are convinced that having some degree of control of the strait is the only way to deter the United States from actually going for a full-scale war. Because the strait clearly is such a point of leverage that if they have it, they can deter the US. If they don't have it, or if it is under question of who's controlling it, that's when there's a vulnerability. If they give up the strait, this is how they believe it. They see it now, right or wrong. If they give it up, it's just paving the way for them to get a much, much larger attack. And again, going back to see what happened under the MOU, prior to the MOU, the US was trying to create a fortified southern corridor in Omani waters that the Iranians could not close. The MOU is signed, and the MOU is supposed to then be the vehicle through which they find a final conclusion, a final settlement on how to handle it. But simultaneously with the MOU, the US is still trying to create that southern corridor. And this is what the Iranians then saw as a threat, that the MOU was just being used as a period of time in which, under the guise of it, the US was changing the facts on the ground in the straits. And once the US had that southern corridor, then it could restart the war without the same cost being inflicted on the world economy if the Iranians chose to close the strait, because they would only be able to close a portion of it. I think the whole thing was a huge miscalculation from the US side, because even if the southern corridor was kept open, it would probably not be able to take more than 20% of the traffic anyways. And that's assuming that the southern corridor could be kept open, which is also a very significant question mark, mindful of the fact that the Iranians probably could still shoot at those ships, perhaps with lesser accuracy. But the other part is that, okay, if you manage to take the Strait of Hormuz or a portion of it out of Iranian control, then you're risking the closure of the Red Sea, which is now exactly where we are.
Oh, well, so first, 20% only can go through the Omani side?
So the estimations are that, if the traffic opens up, in the best case scenario, essentially, and the northern part is closed and the southern part is open, it would probably not be able to handle more than 20% of the traffic that would be the case if the full thing was open. The accuracy of that number, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know exactly how they concluded that. But nevertheless, there were still question marks, in my view, as to the value of investing so much in that type of a military effort to keep the strait open, or to keep the Iranians not having control over it. And again, I think this is what it comes down to. And by the way, there's plenty of countries in the GCC that absolutely do not want to see the Iranians control. But what was fascinating, that during the MOU, it was very clear, if there ever was going to be a solution, it would have to be a compromise. A compromise that means that neither side is really controlling it. But this is what now has been blown up as a result of going back to war.
Yeah. So how far do you think Trump will go to wrestle that control away from Iran? I think that's the next big question. As you said, the Iranians won't give it up. We've kind of put that aside. We said that Trump doesn't care enough about the Gulf. So now the other question is, how much is he willing to sacrifice in terms of political capital, financial capital for the US, military capital in terms of damage plus munitions to be able to achieve that objective?
It's unclear. You have people who say that there's no way that the president would ever put in ground troops. And at the same time, we're seeing signs that seems to suggest that there is a preparation for at least some level of ground troops, particularly some special forces. We're not talking about a full-scale invasion that would take hundreds of thousands of troops and months in preparations. But it seems like we're in a slippery slope in which, because of one sunk cost, the president is throwing more good money after bad. And this is part of the reason why, to me, it was shocking that there was a willingness to restart the war after the huge difficulty there was to get to a ceasefire, and from the ceasefire, get to the MOU. It was so difficult, it was so painful, and all of that has been thrown away by going back to war, and really a very difficult path to be able to ever get back to where we were before. And I'm not saying the MOU was perfect or that diplomacy was going the way it should, but it was really critical to understand what had been evaded. And now I fear that we may come to understand it, but it's too late.
What do you think are the... Are you also worried, like some, that this could become a forever war based on the latest developments? Or do you think that's still extremely unlikely?
We talked about it last time as well.
I know, I know. That's why I said based on the latest developments, because I think that answer should change. Yeah, exactly.
We're definitely getting closer to a scenario in which we get so deep into something. And again, what I said before is that you have either a combination of an unattainable goal and then a political incentive structure, which makes the president think that it is riskier and costlier to end the war than it is to continue the war, even if the war cannot be won. It's when you have that scenario, it just keeps on going because no one has the guts to actually end it. Why would you take the cost? Just continue the war, lie to the American people, kick the can down the road, and let it be the headache of the next president. There is a risk increasingly that we go to this point because as time goes on, the idea that the US needs to control the Strait or make sure that the Iranians don't have the control of the Strait becomes some sort of a truism in and of itself. And we actually start forgetting about, okay, there might be workarounds, there are other things, or there may be compromises that could be pursued. And it just becomes politically impossible not to have that position. And once you have that position, you don't leave any room for compromise. I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think there was anything early on in Afghanistan or early on in Iraq that made it inevitable for those wars to become endless. But we're moving in that direction because the more is invested in it, the more face is invested in it, the more difficult it is to be able to pull out of it. And that's, again, part of the reason, the fact that that ended up being no more than 40 days or so of war, even though it was very tricky, having gotten out of, I mean, it's like really, you had the near-death experience, and then you choose to go back into such a disaster. It's just insane.
So crazy.
And I know a lot of people were saying, like, I was wrong thinking that we wouldn't be here, that, once they had achieved the ceasefire and the MOU, they would remain committed. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's what I thought. And I'm still baffled that they were so dumb to go back into this situation because it's just so illogical.
But that's what I said. I said, if logic prevails, this war would be over. And I made my bet thinking that logic was still dictating policy. Logic, that you could logically make mistakes. But we're past that stage now.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it as a binary. Either it's logic or something else. It's a spectrum. But this one was such that it would take such a degree of irrationality to overcome the logic, and yet it happened.
This one was binary. This one was binary. So I know from the last time I asked you that question, you do think that we're more likely to see war than an end to the war in the next month. And I'm sure you still hold that position with the latest developments. If we do see a continuation of the war, just tell me, how bad do you think it's going to get?
It really depends on what the United States does at this point. And I say that very specifically because the pattern we're still seeing is that the Iranians are striking at whatever the US strikes. So we're not seeing the Iranians going first at a desalination plant. It comes in response to a desalination plant being struck on the Iranian side. And Trump has also made it clear. He takes a desalination plant for a ship, right? He doesn't take a ship for a ship. He takes a desalination or a critical infrastructure of something else. And then when that happens, the Iranians respond by doing something in Bahrain or in Kuwait. So it very much depends on what the US does here. If the US, for instance, tries to take an island, or if there's an effort here to send in some troops or some paramilitary groups from the Iraqi border. For instance, there's a border checkpoint that was bombed, that is actually very active for pilgrims as well. And, it raises the question, why was this a target? And it's impossible not to look at the possibility that that was done because of a logistical reason in which there would be, for me, the direction there was a need to be able to send troops. So, there's a lot of things that are happening.
That was struck by the Americans on the Iraqi border, correct?
Yes, exactly. And then there was one that was struck on the Kuwaiti border by the Iranians. So there are things that may not be as haphazardous as they may first look, or be some sort of a statistical outlier. But if they are for any particular purpose, it does seem to be to have some element of ground troops involved in.